The Chargers running game was very underwhelming in 2024, but easily the best part of it was JK Dobbins, who is now headed into unrestricted free agency. And if you look at what else is on the roster, it feels like you have to re-sign him.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Droegemeier, and we've been covering the Chargers now for 9 seasons together, but this is our 7th year as the host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you to the everydayers out there for making us your first listen. To make sure that you never miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel, and listen wherever you get your podcast from. David, what do we got today?
The Chargers running game was definitely underwhelming last year, but one of the most exciting parts of it was JK Dobbins coming back after serious injuries, and he should definitely be in line for comeback player of the year. And he was explosive, and I think the Chargers definitely should be bringing him back. We're also going to talk about our top 3 internal free agents that we want to see the Chargers bring back into the fold, and also tell you that the Ben Herbert program definitely works.
Yeah, the exciting thing I think about the Ben Herbert part of it is it feels like things got a little bit better in 2024, and now it can really kind of take a leap in 2025 now that guys will be in that program for an extended period. But today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. David, it is the offseason and it is the return of Fan Mail Friday, so thank you to all the Chargers fans and the everydayers out there for hitting us up at Locked On LAC with your questions. And we have a great one here from Jackson who says, is JK Dobbins worth a re-sign, or do you let him walk and go after a back in the draft? Is there a possibility that both of those things happen? So let's start with the first part of it here, David, just about JK Dobbins, because it's interesting because JK Dobbins, you never really knew what to expect from him. You never knew exactly what you were going to get from him, at least as far as how much he'd be out there. And he goes out and has arguably his best season, statistically his best season in a lot of ways. Did end up hitting IR for a stint in 4 games, but by the JK Dobbins standards, that's a hugely positive season for him. And I think when you're looking at, David, who the Chargers should re-sign, we'll get to our top 3 and if he makes that list. But he's up there, no doubt about it, no matter how you feel about it. If you look at kind of what the Chargers have in that room right now, there's a few guys that are signed in 2025 and beyond. But how do you not sign the only dude who averaged, more than 3.6 yards per carry to your team? Because he was so important to the only kind of success the Chargers had in the running game last year.
Absolutely. I mean, when you're talking about the explosive nature and the ability to really take it the distance and be a real legitimate threat anytime the ball was in your hands, that was J.K. Dobbins for the Chargers running game. 195 carries, 905 yards, and 9 touchdowns, while going for 4.6 yards per carry. And that's something that it's been crazy. You look at his career, he's been up around 5 yards per carry and over pretty much his entire career. So also one of the things I want to point out, no fumbles, 0 fumbles for JK Dobbins in 2024. So that is very, very impressive for the amount of touches he had. 37 forced missed tackles as well. So he was very elusive, and 27 runs of 10 plus yards in 2024. Like I said, he was a legitimate threat to take it the distance anytime he had the ball in his hands. He was one of the more exciting and more, I would say, explosive parts of the Chargers offense in 2024.
Yeah, he was one of the Chargers' better offensive players. I mean, I think if you're going down the list of their best offensive players, it's probably Herbert, it's Ladd McConkey, it's Joe Alt, it's Rashawn Slater, and then after that, you're probably looking at JK Dobbins, which is why it feels so important for them to potentially bring him back. But it doesn't necessarily kind of feel like you're still answering what who your long-term franchise running back is. So I understand the draft part of it too, because I think when you look at what the Chargers were able to do last year, it's Gus Edwards, 101 carries for 365 yards at a 3.6 average. It's Kamani Vidal, who's 43 for 155 yards and no touchdowns. I still think, hey, we haven't seen what Kamani Vidal can do yet. Of course, it's a very small sample size, but I don't know how you feel great about it. Like, I don't know how you could definitively say anyone outside of J.K. Dobbins is a positive for you in the running game. And let's also put out there, they were, playing against a stacked deck in in a lot of ways. The Chargers run blocking wasn't great this year. Didn't get a lot of push. There were not a lot of open running lanes. And when there were, these guys were finding them for the most part. But also, none of these guys really a factor in the receiving game, which kind of disappointing as well. Kamani Vidal, you thought he was going to be the most explosive player in Chargers history because his first play is, 38-yard touchdown.
Yeah.
And then considerably cooled off. So it does feel like, this is a group that needs an addition to it. You need to add some more talent. You need to add some more juice. It'd be interesting to see what they do with Gus Edwards just because he was so banged up last year. Maybe we never really saw the full version. But how much can you expect and how much can you, stock can you put into that going into 2025 for a group that obviously needs to improve? So will they take a running back? Sure, but it's hard to kind of have faith that the Chargers are going to hit because they've kind of whiffed on so many day 3 running backs. And it feels like spending a premier pick on running back kind of avoids some of the other big issues you have on the roster.
Well, and just from a roster building perspective, it's not always the brightest thing to go in and draft a running back high. I mean, we've seen that not work out a lot of times, and we've seen it not work out for the Chargers directly. And I think that's why.
Both ways, right?
Yeah, you've seen it both ways.
Yeah, you've had Josh Kelly, obviously didn't work out. You have a Larry Roundtree, didn't work out. You have Isaiah Spiller, Kamani Vidal, at some point, it feels like you have to spend more in the draft, right? I don't know, man. It's really, really tough to say what the right answer is there.
I can see both happening, though, for sure. I can see the Chargers re-signing JK Dobbins and then going back in the draft and adding a running back as well.
I can see it, too. I mean, it feels like that's probably what the ideal option would be, unless you're going to go pay another free agent running back. But I think the big thing is just how much JK Dobbins is going to want. And I think when you look at what the running back contracts were last year, some guys got paid, right?
Yeah,
some guys got paid.
Creep up.
Saquon, Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, Tony Pollard, Aaron Jones, DeAndre Swift all made over $7 million in contracts, but no one else did. So it's hard to, those guys all had multiple seasons of being healthy and putting up kind of premier production for running backs, and that's something that J.K. Dobbins doesn't have. So he's going to be an interesting case study to see what the value is for him on the open market. But if I'm the Chargers, I don't want him going anywhere. Even with the missed games, he was still worth it, and you just can't have only him coming back. I think is the big part. But that leads us to this from Jason Sprinkle Sr., who says, how does the team fix the run game with what Greg Roman wants the offensive scheme to be? What do you think?
Well, so number one, it's obviously improve the interior of the offensive line. And for me, that's going out and signing 2, maybe 3 maulers in the middle of that interior offensive line. They have to get better run blockers and they have to just get better talent in the middle of their offensive line. That's first and foremost. Secondly, I would cut Gus Edwards. I think that's just I've seen enough. He just doesn't have the same explosion. Also, he is brought in to be a short yardage monster, someone who was really effective in those situations. He was not effective in those situations in 2024. Maybe it's the injuries, but honestly, I don't think that this is something that the Chargers can run back another year. The Chargers can also save $3.125 million in cap space by getting rid of Gus Edwards. I think that's really the plan. I think they have to replace him with someone who's more effective, more explosive to pair with J.K. Dobbins.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, right? Because he's obviously a guy that has Ravens ties with Greg Roman, going back to their time in Baltimore together. And I think that obviously adding more talent to the room, helping the offensive line. We'll talk more about the offensive line later, so I don't want to stick with just that right now. The running game just has to be more connected and more physical, right? It's such a chemistry-based thing, which is like if you want to swap out all these offensive linemen, one thing it doesn't help is the chemistry. But obviously, if you're looking at the chemistry of the group in 2024, you wouldn't look at that and put it on the teach tape for things you want to do. So it was already such a big problem. Looking outside the box, I would say, okay, getting Justin Herbert, if he's fully healthy, much more involved in the running game, I think would go a long ways in opening up some things because nobody's actually believing that he's going to take it himself right now. This is the other big thing. Add more receiving talent. Add more juice to the rest of your offense because no one was scared of anything you had out there not named Ladd McConkey, so they could go up, send guys, stack the box, play man coverage, and there was really only one guy that can beat them, a la what the Texans did in that last game. So I think that when you're looking at, okay, how can they fix this? It's a team effort. You got to have tight ends that can block and wide receivers that can block and obviously an offensive line that can block. But another thing that really helps that is having really explosive weapons. And I'd say especially tight ends, right? If you want to go heavy, get guys that can actually catch the ball out of heavy packages and that are actual threats So you can't just sell out against the run or, worry about catching up to Will Dissly if you don't, right? Like the Chargers, if they get more juice at the receiving, at receiver, at tight end, get more pass catching options, I actually do think that would help the running game a lot as well. But we still have much more to get into, including who our top 3 internal free agents for the Chargers would be, and if JK Dobbins is on that list, and more on today's Locked On Chargers podcast. First, I need to tell you guys that it's playoff time, and if you're like me, you want to make the most out of these final weeks of football action, and that's where PrizePicks comes in. If you love football and want a chance to win real money while watching the games, PrizePicks is the place for you, and it's the best place to turn sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy player projections. With PrizePicks, you simply pick more or less on player stats like total passing yards or rushing touchdowns, and for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money. You can make your picks in less than 60 seconds, and whether you're looking for a flex play to boost your payout or you want to cash out quickly, PrizePicks has got you covered with over 10 million members and billions in winnings. Billions. It's clear that people are loving this platform. I know I've been playing for a while, and if you guys want to get in on this weekend's playoff action, you go with Jared Goff to go for more than or less than 230 passing yards, and Saquon Barkley to go more than or less than 1 touchdown. It's so easy to use, and I love the fast payout. Seriously, I've gotten paid out in 15 minutes. And we also have a special offer for Locked On NFL listeners. Download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5. It's PrizePicks. Run your game. Download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play just that $5 lineup. PrizePicks. Run your game. David, let's get into more fan mail here because it is the first fan mail Friday of the offseason. We had a lot of great stuff to get into today, including our boy Athir, who not only calls in for the season, with his crazy bold predictions and didn't hit any this year, but one of these crazy bold predictions for the games will come right for Athir. But it doesn't stop in the offseason for Athir, neither does it for us. And let's hear what he has for us this week because we know he's always bringing heat.
Dan, David, this is Athir. My first offseason question. Pick 3 players, offense or defense, the Chargers must find going into next season. Okay? I'm going to go with Puna, Khalil Mack, and Elijah Molden. What do you say? Thank you. Love you.
I mean, I think it's a good list. If you're talking about those 3 guys, I mean, all 3 of those guys would be right at the top of my list of who I'm bringing back. I think the one I would swap is probably Elijah Molden for JK Dobbins. I love Khalil Mack. I think he's definitely in there. Puna Ford, one of the more underrated players on the Chargers team, not just their defense this season. I'd probably go JK Dobbins, but man, it's hard to leave Elijah Molden off that list. I mean, he's obviously going to be coming back from a more serious injury. JK Dobbins ends the season relatively healthy, but man, it would be hard to leave him off because he's definitely somebody I want to see back.
I want to see Elijah Molden back as well, and I think Elijah Molden's play is what allowed Derwin James to kind of return to prominence by allowing him to come back closer to the line of scrimmage and be a disruptor in the running game and get after the quarterback and get those 5.5 sacks. You can't do that if you need Derwin James to help you on the back end. So I think Elijah Molden is definitely a player that's close to my list, but it's Puna Ford for sure because, I mean, he was a huge, huge reason why the Chargers were much, much better against the run. 85.1 overall grade after basically being an afterthought with the Buffalo Bills. So it's been fantastic to watch his resurgence. Khalil Mack is definitely there, and J.K. Dobbins is my third just because he's very much needed, and you have to have somebody who has that explosion, has that productivity. I think those are the 3 guys that I think are the tops of my list.
Yeah, I think that the thing that Elijah Molden brought that is something we've talked about for a long time is he was a true free safety type of safety, a dude who can cover it on the back end, second in the team in interceptions this season. We saw, especially early on in the year, he was everywhere making plays on the football. Really low missed tackle rate when you're going to be that last line of defense, and you have to have those open field, hard angle tackles that you have to make there, or it's a touchdown. He came through with that more often than not. So I'd like to see him back. And I mean, Puna Ford, I think he's definitely, Khalil Mack for me is number 1. Puna Ford for me is number 2. And I would say also you could add Tier Tart to that list too. Yes. I think, obviously if Puna goes and gets a bag somewhere and the Chargers aren't willing to match it, Tier Tart would be someone that you could feel pretty good about the consolation prize because the dude has so much talent. And it feels like when he was on, like he has game wrecking potential.
You saw it quick too.
Yeah, and Puna, it was just the football IQ, the screen diagnosis is
He
like
was there,
all the.
man.
He was so good, subtle pass rusher, not going to be the dominant in that regard ever. But I think the thing is like, even though you would still say, hey, the Chargers defensive tackle room needs some juice, if you're bringing back Puna Ford and Tier Tart, both guys who I don't think are going to command a ton of money on the open market, that gives you a good foundation. That gives you a good base, because these guys don't play every snap, right? So it's not just you have two starters and you're feeling great about that. It's those two guys, and then you have to go add to it. But man, without those guys, what does that room look like? Your fullback, Scott Matlock, Tito Abonia, Justin Aboigbe, who is a healthy scratch a lot of the season.
Did not really play at all. Yeah,
exactly. Like there's not a lot there. If you can get those two back, I think that would be one of the top of my priority list, especially in that room, especially to try to keep what was the top scoring defense in the NFL together. But there's more decisions the Chargers have to make, and one of the most important ones is what they're going to do with the interior of their offensive line. That's where Joe from Jersey is coming from here.
Hey guys, Joe from Jersey. It's been a little while since I've called, but I've been listening to you every single episode, so thank you. Last game was brutal to watch. My question to you is this, and I've had some debate with my Charger friend. The interior line, I can't stand it. We got Bozeman, who I think is very overrated, but I got some of my friends who think he's a Pro Bowler. We've got a mixture at the right guard position, and I'm not really sure if Sawyer's the guy, but I kind of like him a little bit, but he didn't play well last game. We have left guard, and he's been on and off. Some people love him, some people hate him. What are your thoughts on that interior line? Do we keep the left guard, get rid of Sawyer, or keep him as depth? Do we go with Bozeman again? What do you guys think? Love to hear it. Thanks, guys.
David, it's a very interesting question, and it's one that we're going to continue to talk about throughout the rest of the offseason, because it's one of the places where if you're looking for how this Chargers team gets a lot better, I think that would be one of the first places you would look. And I think the other part of it is if you looked at why the Chargers aren't still playing right now, it would be one of the first places that you look. And I think there are going to be some tough decisions because Jamari Sawyer, Trey Pipkins, Zion Johnson, those dudes are all still under contract, right? The only one of those guys that was a regular, that's a free agent, is Bradley Bozeman. And we also heard they want to bring him back, but it's like, you cannot bring back that same group.
Yeah, you definitely can't. I mean, it was not good enough. You look at Zion Johnson, it was a 65.7 overall grade, but it was also 5 sacks, 13 hits, 33 pressures. Bradley Bozeman, 4 sacks, 27 pressures, 64.7 run block grade, which was the highest, second to Zion Johnson, actually, among these guys. And then Trey Pipkins, switching to guard for the first time in his NFL career, was not a resounding success here. 57.8 overall grade, according to PFF, 6 sacks and 29 pressures allowed. That's not going to cut it. It's not going to cut it and the one thing that this group struggled with so much this year was being able to handle twists and stunts, and it was repeatedly exploited all season long. Never much more present than in that Houston Texans wild card game where they just abused them. I mean, they really, really took advantage of that weakness. They continued to hit it. And, it resulted in them, basically giving up back-to-back sacks with their inability to pick up those stunts and twists, even on, repeated plays. So this interior unit, you can't bring back. I mean, I think the only one of these guys that I would feel comfortable bringing back is probably Zion Johnson. The rest, I think, have to get replaced and upgraded.
Yeah, and Zion Johnson probably had the worst of anyone in that playoff game, right? And the thing with Zion Johnson is how many years can you think this is the year that he becomes a lot better? But I think to what your point is, though, like I think you can hide one guy. Right. You can't hide 3 guys. No. Right? If it's just Zion Johnson, at least you know that, right? Like there's ways to kind of scheme around it. There's ways to not let that derail a game plan. And if you're looking at trying to, replace 3 guys at starter level, and if you're paying for them in free agency, you're going to have to overpay them because that's what starting level guards get and starting level centers get right now. It's unrealistic to think they're just going to blow all that just on the interior of the offensive line. But at the same time, you absolutely cannot just go into it saying, hey, we're just going to hope these guys improve. And they're just going to get better in year 2. You can't. You can't go into it thinking that. I mean, he also did bring up Jamari Sawyer, which you didn't have there, but like, Jamari Sawyer, we've seen it now. We saw him for a full season. A lot of y'all thought he'd be the answer for Trey Pipkins this year, and he wasn't, right? So, like,
No.
done with that. If you want to bring, Jamari Sawyer, Bradley Bozeman, same boat. If you want to bring him back for depth or something like that, I could see it. I'd understand it. Trey Pipkins has the 5th highest cap hit on this team next season right now.
Huge cut candidate.
He is going to get cut almost certainly, especially because even at the end of the season, they were kind of, working with Jamari Sawyer in over him at times. So, man, when you're having Sam Mustipher and Jamari Sawyer and Trey Pipkins all rotating in at the same guard spot because you don't know which one of those guys is better, you throw the whole lot out and you try to rebuild, because right there, chemistry or not, building in year 2 or not, it just needs to be better. You need more talent in that room, and that was one of the biggest weaknesses on this Chargers roster. But one of the things that did get better in 2024 was the Chargers' injuries, and I think their conditioning and a lot of things because of a man named Ben Herbert, is one of the last people in the world I would ever want to cross. But I do want to talk about the success seemingly that Ben Herbert had in year 1 with the Chargers, and so much more on today's Locked On Chargers podcast. This is a message from our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. Taxes are waiting and wondering and worrying if you're going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now Taxes is matching with the TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives you your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy, all so you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now this is Taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guaranteed details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. David, we have more to get into on this Fan Mail Friday, and thank you to the everydayers out there who hit us up at Locked On LAC, or those who called into the voicemail line at 323-524-7924, because we will continue to be throughout the entire offseason, 5 days a week until June, and even then, 3 days a week. So thank you guys, as always, for making us your first listen. If you need a second listen, make sure to check out the new slate at Locked On NFL if you want to keep up with everything going on around the league, with 2 shows a day. My guy Tyler, the Madman, rolling, and also Tony Wiggins as they bring on the guests from around the network who cover their teams every day on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast from. David, let's get to this next Fan Mail Friday question from CMCG Sports, who says, what's your opinion on Ben Herbert's impact on the Chargers this season? Less injuries, players have more gas tank in the fourth quarter. Curious on your views. And David, this is an inexact science trying to decide, you can go by adjusted games lost, which aren't even out for the 2024 season yet, so we can see what those look like when they do. But I think when you're looking at what the success was under Ben Herbert, I think the place that I would point to first is just your stars were on the field. I think if you have somebody and you're kind of trying to gauge, hey, how is it going? One of the big things for me is, hey, are your stars on the field? And I think if you look at guys like a Joey Bosa playing most games since 2021, you look at Justin Herbert starting every game, even throughout all the injuries that he had. Derwin James, someone who's battled big injuries in the past, playing every game except for the game he was suspended. I think when you go up and down the list, David, to me, I think that the Ben Herbert experiment, the Ben Herbert program in year 1 was a success.
I agree. I think that, the Chargers did a fantastic job of doing what they said they were going to do, which is making these guys harder to break. I mean, did they bend a little bit? Yes. Were there some stints on IR? Yeah, there was some stints. But most of the time, these guys were coming back from IR and getting back on the field and being productive once they did get back on the field. And so I think that is a testament to Ben Herbert and his program, and also the medical training staff as well. I think they did a fantastic job of trying to get the most out of these guys, tried to give them the treatment that they needed throughout the week to get them to game week. Whether it was the veteran rest days for Khalil Mack to kind of prolong his career, or if it was just getting these guys back on the football field. I think Ben Herbert and his program deserves some much needed praise for what they were able to do. And like you said, and like we've said many times, it's just going to get better as they get to continue to work with Ben Herbert through the years.
Well, I think you just look at even 2023, right? And some of it is just the players that you bring in and bringing players who don't get injured as much, because you go back to 2023 and you see Joey Bosa, Justin Herbert, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Josh Palmer, all those dudes missed 4+ games, right? And I think the biggest thing was, David, I mean, if you look at, what star players missed a lot of time this year, it's probably only JK Dobbins. And that's the crazy thing is if it's just JK Dobbins and that 4 games, like 4 games missed for JK Dobbins is like an incredible season based on the other seasons that he's had, right? I mean, he's only
he's had some major injuries, losing full seasons.
He has, and the thing is I think when you look at who suffered season-ending injuries this year, Elijah Molden, who wasn't even with the team in the offseason, Asante Samuel Jr., which was kind of a weird thing.
When Elijah Molden was towards the end of the season anyway, he played most of the year.
That's the hard thing. Like, does Brendan Rice count on that? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, Asante Samuel Jr. I think would probably be the one, right? Because he had the stinger syndrome, and he definitely did have to miss a good majority of the year, and he was a starting corner. So,
and that's also something he said he was born with, right? So it's like I don't even know
that's not Ben Herbert's fault.
Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, like it's an imperfect science, but I think that the nice thing is like the benefits that these dudes should get in year 2, because one of the big things Jim Harbaugh was saying even in his press conference was like, use the bolt, right? Like Ben Herbert's going to be there, the facility is going to be there. There's not as many restrictions this time of year. $300 million
facility. Use it.
Come use it. Yeah. Use it. And I think that we, especially with like the rookies going into their second year, right? All those dudes being in that program, I think it's going to pay even more dividends next year. But I think it's always hard because even if it's less injuries, if it's your star players getting hurt, it feels like it's a lot worse. And if you're judging it by that, Ben Herbert did a really, really good job keeping his star players on the field. And when they did have guys that went to IR, they did such a good job of bringing them back to the point where they maxed out the amount of people they could actually bring back from injured reserve. We don't even know if some of those guys could have come back because the Chargers brought everybody they could. Felt like they managed IR a lot better this year too. Just
I agree.
Getting guys on there quickly so they can come back and make an impact later down the road and giving you more, kind of roster flexibility and knowing. Because, I mean, how many times did we see something, even under Brandon Staley, even before that, where it's like it could be a 2-week injury or we could be missing this dude for 7 weeks and he might not hit IR either way. Like that happened. That's a thing.
That's Jim Harbaugh, though, not giving anybody any information whatsoever. He was not going to be in a Brandon Staley situation. That is for sure.
Well, and internally, it just feels like they have a much better grasp of not only, how long a player should be out, but the best ways of getting them back on the field as well. And we saw that play a huge factor for them this year. But we do have one more voicemail I want to get to here that's asking about something a little bit different regarding Jim Harbaugh.
Hey, what's up, Daniel and David? Hey, so we heard Jim Harbaugh talking about he's going to have heart surgery and hip surgery. So hopefully nothing happens next year. But in case something happens next year with he might have to miss a game and stuff, who do you think is going to take his spot, whatever, in case he's going to have to miss a game? And what's your guys' reaction when you heard that in the press comments? So let me know what you guys think. Thank you guys. Both up, baby.
It's an interesting question and an interesting kind of tidbit that came out. We knew that Jim Harbaugh was in the blue medical tent early on this season because he was having, some irregular heartbeats and things like that. Had to get it checked out. Said he was going to have to get an ablation again, which is something he's already had in the past. And also said that he had to get his hip replaced, which if you watched him kind of penguin, walk, I mean, he was basically Colin Farrell out there, the active performance of his life, kind of looking like the penguin walking around the field. So no surprise there. But I also think that Jim Harbaugh would bypass heart surgery and a hip replacement if it meant missing time with the team. I don't think there's any chance that's going to happen. But it does bring up an interesting question of where they would go, David, if he did have to miss any time.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, as far as the procedure, according to, to Google and my research, it's minimally invasive and it's not something that's super serious. The hip surgery, that depends on the individual as far as that recovery time. But I think we already know who would take over if Coach Harbaugh would have to miss any time, because what happened last year when he had to go away for a short period of time, Jesse Minter was the interim head coach for that period of time. So I would imagine, given that information and the fact that Jesse Minter is on the field as opposed to Greg Roman, who is in the booth, who would be the best choice to probably be the interim head coach if there was any situation to where Jim Harbaugh had to miss any time.
Yeah, and it'd be interesting because obviously, that was a, last minute thing where you're making a decision on the fly. If they knew he was going to miss time, who knows? But you would think, okay, for Greg Roman, if you're talking about games and he feels at best in the booth, you don't want him worrying about, clock management and stuff like that. Because in a vacuum, you would think it would be Greg Roman, right? A dude who's worked for Jim Harbaugh for a long time, a dude who, you would want to kind of give that opportunity to shine to. I mean, even when, he got suspended for games in college, it was his offense coordinator was Sharon Moore who took over and ended up taking over the head coaching job on a permanent basis after that. But
Right.
I do think, to me, Andy Bischoff gives the most interim coach energy. That to me, like that's who I would say if I'm going vibes only, it would be Andy Bischoff. Who's,
I'm going Ryan Ficken.
Yeah, 105 guy burgers and all that. I just feel like, kind of in the Gift Smith way, where it's like if you need an interim head coach, it feels like that's something, Andy Bischoff is going to be the guy to do, and he's the man to lead. And shout out to Gift Smith for being the tank master general and leading the Chargers to a top 5 pick when you saw so many teams just in the last couple weeks. Teams just have the number 1 overall pick. The Giants, the Patriots, the Raiders all just slip out of their hands because they're winning meaningless games at the end of the season. Not on Gift Smith's watch, and also shout out because his Rams defensive line just absolutely balled out and destroyed the Vikings last weekend. So great to see that, dude, because an interim coach is always such a death knell. Like you're literally walking the plank. I want to know the last time an interim coach. Obviously, Antonio Pearson's not really
that's
a great example.
You got 1 year, that don't even count.
Well, I mean, it just look how that ended. But like the last time an interim coach was actually like held onto on the staff or kind of put back to where they were before the other coach got fired, it just doesn't happen. So for Gift Smith to kind of land on his feet like that, I think is huge. Didn't even have to move his family or anything. He stays in Los Angeles, which is really cool. But that is going to wrap things up for today's show. Next week, we have a big interview planned coming up for you guys, trying to get somebody big on the show, and very excited about that. We're back to our normal buy or sell Tuesday, and also maybe some playoff lessons. Maybe, A.J. Brown gets 1 target this week, and the Chargers might need to trade for him if the Eagles have a bad loss and he's trying to get out. Maybe there's some other options, not just in free agency or the draft this year, the Chargers could attack as far as adding weapons to this roster. So make sure you guys are here because it is the rest of the offseason, your team every day. And to make sure you don't miss it, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcasts from, as well as finding the show every day on all of our social media, on Twitter at Locked On LAC, where a lot of these questions came from, on Instagram at Locked On Chargers, and our Locked On Chargers Facebook page. You can also call into the voicemail line at 323-524-7924 and leave a 30-second Chargers question. Whether it's question, buy or sell, you name it, you can do it right there. But that is going to wrap things up for us today. You know what it is. We'll be back with you guys on Monday as the only daily Chargers podcast out there. But until then, guys, take it easy and go Bulls.